If you're thinking about withdrawing from your IRA for qualified expenses, it's crucial to understand how to avoid penalties. Many retirees don't realize that taking funds out of an IRA can trigger a hefty penalty, but with the right approach, you can legally avoid that while still using your funds when you need them most. Now, before we dive into the specifics, you should know that there are certain exceptions where you can avoid the 10% early withdrawal penalty, even if you're under the age of 5912. For instance, if you need the money for qualified expenses like medical costs, first-time home purchases, or education, you could be eligible to withdraw without the penalty. But here's where it gets tricky. These exceptions are not as broad as some might think, and navigating the rules can be complicated. So, how do you make sure your withdrawal qualifies? First, medical expenses are a big one. If you're withdrawing to cover unreimbursed medical expenses that exceed 7.5% of your adjusted gross income, you can do so penalty-free. But remember, it's only for the portion of expenses that go beyond that threshold. This means if your medical costs are high, you can tap into your IRA for some relief, but don't forget about those specific thresholds. Another big one is the first-time homebuyer exception. You can use up to $10,000 from your IRA for a first-time home purchase without facing the early withdrawal penalty. But again, it must be for the purchase of your first home, and there are rules around what qualifies as first time, so make sure you fully understand this one before withdrawing. Now let's talk about education. If you need funds for tuition, books, or other education-related expenses for yourself or a dependent, you can avoid penalties on your IRA withdrawals. But here's a common misconception. This exception applies to both higher education expenses and K-12 costs, but only for certain types of expenses. It's important to double-check with the IRS guidelines to ensure you meet the criteria. If you're planning on using your IRA for medical or education expenses, make sure you keep documentation of the expenditures. That way, if the IRS ever questions your withdrawal, you'll be prepared. It's all about having a clear paper trail to prove that the expenses were legitimate and qualified. But here's the catch. Even though you can avoid the early withdrawal penalty, you still might owe taxes on the withdrawal depending on the type of IRA you have. With a traditional IRA, the money you take out will be taxed as ordinary income. So, while you might not get hit with that 10% penalty, it doesn't mean you won't pay taxes on it. This is where many people get tripped up. Now, here's something to consider. If you're serious about protecting your wealth in the next 2 weeks, I recommend checking out the free Gold IRA guide linked in the description below. Thousands of Americans are opening gold IRAs to safeguard their savings, especially when the market feels uncertain. This free guide shows you how gold IRAs work, how they help preserve wealth, and why they're becoming the go-to retirement option for many Americans. You might be surprised by how much it could benefit your situation. Back to your IRA options, there's one more critical aspect to consider. You can always withdraw from your Roth IRA penalty-free as long as the account has been open for at least 5 years. The beauty of the Roth IRA is that you're not taxed on your withdrawals, unlike traditional IRAs. If you're using the funds for qualified expenses, you could be in a great position to make withdrawals without penalty. But again, if you need funds from a traditional IRA, you'll need to be cautious about taxes and penalties. And here's the big takeaway. If you're not using your IRA for qualified expenses, you risk facing that 10% penalty on early withdrawals. However, if you follow the rules, it is possible to access your funds for specific needs, like medical expenses, education, or buying your first home, without getting penalized. Just be sure to meet all the requirements and keep track of your receipts. Lastly, if you're someone with more than 100Ks in your IRA or 401k, or even upwards of $5 in savings, you really need to take a closer look at a gold IRA. Gold IRAs offer a unique way to diversify and protect your wealth against economic downturns. You can learn more by grabbing the free Gold IRA guide linked below. It's perfect for retirees who want to safeguard their financial future and avoid unnecessary penalties when withdrawing funds. Remember, the key is knowing the rules and understanding how to make the most of your IRA while avoiding those costly penalties. Be strategic with your withdrawals and take control of your retirement funds.